Great. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome from wherever you're joining us. We apologize for the slight delay, but we wanted to make sure logistically we're all set up. My name is Irini Pita, and I'm a climate resilient analyst with the CIF's pilot program for climate resilience, the PPCR team. We are very excited to have you join us for what we hope will be an informative, engaging, and valuable event on strengthening disaster risk management in climate resilience action, drawing on lessons learned from the experience of the climate investment funds. A few logistical points before we dive in. We have English, French, and Spanish interpretation offered today. We will have a dedicated session for audience Q&A after the second section of the event, but please feel free to share and send us any questions you may have in the chat at any time. Yes, I think we'll get started. We have quite a packed agenda for today and an excellent lineup of speakers. So let's get started. Mel, if you can share the screen, please. Great. And if we can move on to the second slide. So briefly, what are the key objectives of this webinar? Well, the main objective is to showcase how CIF has been contributing to critically important disaster risk management through its 15 years of experience in climate resilience action by looking at CIF's various programs and initiatives. We will hear and share lessons from a recent publication we launched back in June on strengthening disaster risk management and climate resilience actions, lessons learned from the experience of the climate investment funds. We will provide a link to the event page and the study in the chat. You can also find a link to the study in the event registration page. We'll also briefly hear about CIF's partnership with the Global Center on Adaptation, and specifically hear from a winner of the CIF and GCA's Africa Youth Adaptation Solutions Challenge initiative. We'll see how we can, all the lessons and experiences that we're harnessing, how can we use these lessons from CIF's existing portfolio to inform the design and implementation of CIF's new programs. And lastly, we hope that this event will provide an opportunity for forging further collaborations and learning exchanges between CIF and other initiatives focusing on the DRM and climate resilience space, including the Understanding Risk Initiative. Next slide, please. So for today's agenda, we have divided the event in three sections. We'll first hear the first part. We'll hear some opening and framing remarks to set the scene and the context, and share a bit more about CIF and its work in the areas of DRM and climate resilience. We'll also hear a brief presentation of the DRM report findings and key lessons. The second part is a panel discussion, panel contributions, and an open discussion. So it's going to be a moderated panel discussion where we have 5 panelists that will be sharing specific CIF examples, lessons, and experiences from implementing DRM and climate resilience on the ground. And following this moderated panel discussion, we will open up the floor for Q&A with the audience. And then the last part is our closing remarks. We will first hear about the Understanding Risk Initiative and Community of Practice, and then we'll hear from Manu some more forward-looking closing remarks of where CIF is going in terms of adaptation, resilience, and disaster risk management. Next slide, please. Or next one. So I wanted to briefly introduce the first round of speakers for our first session today. Also, quick note that you can find the bios of all our speakers in the event registration page. We will also provide a link to the chat for ease of reference. But we'll first hear from Luis Tineo, who is SIF's interim CEO. Luis has over 25 years experience in developing and implementing large programs, partnerships, and country engagements across different sectors and across different World Bank group practices. We'll then hear from Paul Matthew, who is the coordinator of the SIF's Technical Assistance Facility. The DRM report that we produced was a collaboration between the TAF and the PPCR team, but we'll hear from Paul a bit more on TAF's work and linkages and connections to DRM and resilience. And lastly, for this first part of the webinar, we'll hear from Paul Venton, who is an international development consultant with 25 years of experience in more than 25 countries, specializing in disaster and climate resilience. Paul is also the lead author of the DRM report that we launched in June, and he will provide a brief presentation of the report's main lessons and kind of set the scene for the discussion that will follow. So without further ado, Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irini. This is a pleasure, colleagues, to be here. We have here experts from around the world. We have stakeholders of the SIF, and we have practitioners in the field of the disaster risk management. So for us, it's important to discuss this report, Strengthening the Disaster Risk Management in Climate Resilience Action. It is important for a few reasons that I would like to outline. The first thing is just to showcase the value of the SIF over its past 15 years of experience in accelerating climate action around the world. As many of you know, the SIF has been in business since 2008. We are an almost $12 billion proposition. We claim to be one of the largest and most ambitious multilateral climate finance mechanisms in support of developing countries, and all in the interest of supporting low carbon and climate resilient development. For that, resilience, adaptation, and disaster risk management is one of the key pillars. I'd like to emphasize that the model of the SIF is one that attempts three important things in climate action. The first one is to bring scale to action through significant financing. And this comes under the concessional concept, which means low cost, long-term financing in the interest of lowering the risk and the cost that developing countries face when it's time to access financing. So the SIF tests a number of new business models, builds track records on proven markets. We boost investor confidence to unlock additional sources of finance. But the most important part is to work with a whole range of stakeholders, be it governments, private sector, civil society, local communities, and our implementing partners, the multilateral development banks, which, in addition to bringing significant technical experience and global reach, they also bring the financing that is needed to produce results at scale. So in the SIF, we are proud of our portfolio, about 300 projects right now covering 72 developing and middle-income countries worldwide. So the SIF, of course, it keeps working on its strength, which is to be relevant, to be agile and responsive to the challenges and the country demands. And this is an evolving process. So here we are gonna explore the fundamentals of the SIF model as applied to disaster risk management in our 26 projects in 18 countries. I'd like to highlight that this is the collaboration of two funds that we have in the CIF. The first one is the very well-known PPCR, and the other one is the COVID-19 Technical Assistance Response Initiative, the so-called TAF. Both worked jointly, and the result is has been reflected in the report that we will discuss today. So in this, I would say that we are working hard, meaning we are working hard at improving our design, implementation, and fundamentally adding the lessons learned from these transformational climate resilience and adaptation projects. Today, I hope that you learned about them, that you get more familiarized with the way that the CIF contributes to the work of developing countries, and bring just your own expertise and challenges to us. It's a model that is evolving. It's 15 years in the making, but we are not done yet. There is plenty of ambition in our programs, and I look forward to this discussion today. Thank you so much, and again, thank you for adding me to the program. Good luck today.
Thank you so much, Luis. Moving on to Paul Matthew for a quick presentation on TAF.
Great, thanks so much, Irene. I guess we could just skip to the first slide after yes, all right. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Matthew, and I work with the Technical Assistance Facility at the CIF. Thanks again to the team for the kind invite to allow me to share some thoughts here. Let me provide a brief background, which may be helpful to understand the positioning of the TAF in this effort. So we were launched in 2019, where we mobilized a little over $40 million in technical assistance funding. These were aimed at accelerating low carbon and sustainable development in client countries. So when we think about what sorts of interventions we were looking at, some of our priority activities included both non-lending and lending operations. By non-lending, we were looking at activities aiming to build technical and institutional capacities, or modeling work, for example, to help countries develop their low carbon and climate resilient pathways, and demonstrate how green and resilient recovery fits within those pathways. And then under lending operations, we looked at policy lending, for example. Those looked at identifying and enhancing green policy actions, their implementation with the goal of enhancing critical green and resilient recovery reforms. We also looked at investment lending, so that would be standalone operations through fundings for activities such as project preparation, project-specific assessments, which could include a broad range of interventions like green jobs modeling, just transition assessments, climate risk and vulnerability assessments, with the overall goal of enhancing critical green and resilient recovery mechanisms. We also had a couple of other activities we considered, such as country and regional level exchanges, which would help share lessons learned from designing and implementing green or resilient recovery reforms. I can provide a bit more detail to that later. So on the operational side, the TAF has currently conducted 4 calls for proposals. The first one, which was launched in 2020, with a focus on clean energy investment. So we looked at upstream activities that led to, as I mentioned, policy regulatory environments. We looked at building human and institutional capacities. We looked at designing market-facing solutions like innovative financial instruments and business models. So this helped us build out a pipeline of renewable energy and energy efficiency projects that are currently under implementation by our MDB partners. Now, in this context, the second part might be more relevant in that we had the focus on clean energy, but then we also had a COVID-19 technical assistance response for green and climate resilient recovery initiative, or I'll just call it Green and Resilient Recovery Window for short. So the initiative aimed to ensure increased climate-related ambition and action as part of COVID-19 recovery plans and increased investment mobilization toward these efforts. So in addition to COVID-19, the recent years have, as you know, presented many challenges, including regional instabilities, which caused significant economic downturn, disrupted global trade and supply chains, and so on. So during the pandemic, there were a lot of far-reaching impacts as countries turned to prioritize immediate or short-term public health concerns over longer-term environmental goals. So this crisis sort of underscored the vulnerability of developing countries to the sudden shocks from natural disasters or public health concerns. And it also highlighted for us the interconnectedness of environmental health and public well-being as several factors that contribute to climate change also increase the risk of widespread public health issues. So the effort from our end was to support limiting the risk of climate impacts and helping improve global resilience and adaptation to the increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather events. Since, again, the impacts of climate change are most likely to exacerbate existing social and economic inequalities, affecting significantly vulnerable communities. Could I go on to the next slide, please? All right. So overall, we've had a significant portfolio across the globe, as I mentioned, through these different rounds of funding that we've conducted. These interventions have supported countries in developing renewable energy technologies, implementing climate mitigation and adaptation strategies, and improving overall energy efficiency efforts across industries, amongst others. So through these years, the TAF has received keen interest, and we've been constantly oversubscribed due to the timing and relevance of the support to countries struggling to counterbalance internal economic prosperity and energy security while aligning to their national climate commitments, such as NDCs. In addition to this, we also have a strong knowledge component where we try to tease out lessons learned and add to our overall experiences in programming approaches to support climate smart interventions across the different regions in these contexts. So you can just see a quick snapshot of the types of efforts we conduct to help create a platform for knowledge sharing amongst relevant partner organizations as well as other stakeholders. And in this vein, we set up a partner network working with some of the largest institutions in these spaces, such as OECD, IRENA, IEA, amongst others. So specifically under the COVID-19 Green Resilient Recovery Window, we had a large portfolio of around 40 projects worth around $25 million that we worked very closely with the resilience team at SIF to, say, fine-tune and program. Given their expertise in implementing these types of interventions. So this was the pipeline that the PPCR team has pulled some of the case studies for this study. So just to give you a brief sense of flavor, we had an extremely broad range of interesting interventions, like setting up green financing facilities in Africa and the Caribbean regions, supporting green jobs creation efforts in Latin America, strengthening food systems and promoting farmers' resilience in Asia, amongst others. So the shortlisted efforts were quite timely and rich in providing the latest and greatest updates on the creative efforts ongoing to overcome the evolving challenges and preparing for natural disasters on the ground. But let me stop there and let the team come in so they can provide some more color and actual insights uncovered in this very interesting report. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's great to hear from you and see how SIF's agility, flexibility, and timeliness is at play through through the TAF's work. So moving on to our next speaker, Paul Venton, who is also the lead author of the DRM report. There is a link in the chat to the report for those that haven't seen it yet. And Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And yes, it's very good to be with you all today. I'm grateful for this opportunity to explore the links between climate resilient action and disaster risk management through the SIF experience. So again, a big thanks to the SIF team, in particular Manu, for organizing this event, and to the task team leaders and country focal points, including those that are actually contributing to this webinar. So we look forward to hearing from you a little bit later. Plus, I'd like to just mention Laurie Rufo and Shamfu Lu, who provided lots of guidance, along with many others, including Argu, who's good to see you today, Argu. And a special acknowledgement to Irini herself, facilitating today for all of her incredible work on the study itself. So I'll begin by placing the study in its context, and then I'll highlight some of the main findings and what these seem to point us towards. So first, the context for our work. Unfortunately, we need little reminding of the major disaster events that have occurred in recent times. A wildfire in Maui, devastating floods in Pakistan and in Libya, an earthquake in Syria and Turkey, another in Morocco, and so on. In fact, I think we can probably all point to a challenging drought, storm, heat wave, flood, or some other damaging event, perhaps weather or climate related in particular in our own countries within the past year or so. Additionally, we've all been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic over the last 3 years. And today we have on our minds conflicts in Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza, and elsewhere. This paints a picture of a challenging situation, the reality that we live in. Some could even say a destabilizing world that's groaning due to a complex mix of pressures that too often result in disaster events of one type or another, whether those are rapid onset, slow onset and chronic, large scale, or an accumulation of a multitude of small impacts on families and local communities. Currently, 1 in 33 people worldwide are in need of humanitarian assistance and protection. If we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. This figure, developed for the study, summarizes our framing of the challenges faced and suggests an approach to find solutions. The top half of the illustration depicts some of the drivers of disaster risk, irrespective of specific trigger events. You might not be able to read the details on this slide, but you'll find this in the report. The pressures that are driving disaster events are multifaceted. Poverty, poor governance, inequity, insecurity, public health challenges, underpinned and exacerbated by the almost overwhelming planetary system challenges of climate change, ecosystem degradation, and biodiversity loss. So the disaster risk landscape is extremely challenging and complex. If we quickly consider climate change as one of the drivers of disaster risk, we've often heard that disasters triggered by climate-related events, such as floods, drought, storms, heat waves, and wildfires, have almost doubled in the last 20 years. With every increment in global warming comes an increase in the risk of disaster, both slow and rapid onset, with the potential for mounting humanitarian crises, leading to increased poverty and insecurity and a deepening cycle of vulnerability and exposure and risk. But the drivers of disaster risk that you see in that top half of the diagram don't work in isolation from one another. Rather, they compound one another. This is where the context becomes more complex. For example, besides the occurrence of direct climate-related extreme weather events, we know that adverse impacts of climate change include shifts in vector-borne disease patterns, reductions in agricultural yield, and pressure on ecosystems. In turn, these affect people's health, nutrition, and livelihoods, which then in turn undermines resiliency in broad terms to all manner of shocks, stresses, and disasters. Further demonstrating the interconnectedness of challenges, issues of social inequity are compounded in times of hardship, such as those brought about through disasters and climate change. For example, women and girls who are often more directly dependent on climate and weather-sensitive natural resources and typically bear extra domestic and care responsibilities, and therefore disproportionately feel the pinch of hard times more directly, also face an increased threat of gender-based violence in times of acute hardship, such as in a disaster's aftermath. By exacerbating numerous underlying risk factors, climate change affects people's exposure and vulnerability to a wide mix of hazards, and thereby undermines disaster resilience very broadly. Similarly, public health crises create, spur, and deepen disasters of all types. For example, COVID-19 brought into focus awareness about the interconnectedness of health and the environment, as Paul just mentioned, and revealed how risks and impacts are not necessarily confined, but can reverberate globally. During the pandemic, we also saw how disasters of different types co-occur. For example, in India and Bangladesh, migrant workers were forced to return home to the border areas as the pandemic spread. They were quarantined in cyclone shelters. But in May 2020, Cyclone Amphan hit the region, displacing nearly 5 million people. Concerned over social distancing, many people chose not to take refuge in the shelters. Furthermore, the cyclone destroyed health clinics, worsening conditions for a pandemic response. Similarly, in Pakistan, the unprecedented floods in 2022 that resulted in very many losing their lives and 2 million homes destroyed also destroyed an estimated 13% of the country's healthcare system. Consequently, those affected by increased waterborne disease due to the flood and later very extensive heat had to make do with a weaker, less capable healthcare system. The indirect impacts of the flood rumble on in the lives of millions. So with such a challenging context, where does this leave us and what should we do? I noticed that you brought me back onto the camera, but if you could put the slide back up, please, the next slide. The one before that, please. Thank you. We need to tackle these drivers of disaster risk as illustrated in the bottom half of this figure, the green part. Better appreciating what disasters signify and highlight, these are the pre-existing weaknesses in society, and recognizing the complexity of their drivers and causes compels us to respond by addressing and mitigating the risks and relieving underlying pressures as a first step, not only gearing ourselves to respond to emergencies should they arise. Understanding the risk landscape is the starting point. Then addressing interconnected challenges through holistic, integrated solutions is the vital course of action to be taken. Okay, you can put me back on screen if you wish. So this is why the work of CIF, captured in the study on integrating climate resilient action and disaster risk management, is so important, timely and necessary. The study that Irini and I authored that serves as the backdrop for our time together today collected, synthesized and highlighted key results and lessons from CIF experience across 28 projects in 16 countries and 3 regions, investigating whether and how CIF has been contributing to disaster risk management through its climate resilience action. This work was achieved by analysing the connections between the CIF portfolio and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030. More specifically, the experiences were structured around the 4 Sendai Framework priorities for action. As a reminder, those are: first one, understanding disaster risk. The second one is strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. Third, investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience, and number 4, enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. In addition, as an important consideration across these priorities, capacity building support and gender were included as cross-cutting themes. You could pull up the next slide, please. The next one, please. Thank you. This figure is in the report, and it plots how the CIF experience relates to the Sendai Framework priorities for action and the identified themes that we discovered that are shared across the climate and disaster agendas. Obviously, you can't see the details here because there's too much information on your screen, but you can see that the array of experience is broad, with overlaps in all aspects of the Sendai Framework. There's much experience that is mutually supportive and beneficial. The study itself provides details on all these examples and reflects on issues of integration based on these practical experiences. And our panelists today will be able to reflect on some of these in just a moment. If you could go to the next slide, please. If we were to now shift to thinking ahead, in broad terms, the study identified especially salient areas where climate resilience action and disaster risk management are intertwined in the CIF experience. These suggest some key areas that could inform integrated climate and disaster risk management efforts moving forward. Firstly, we need an iterative, multi-hazard understanding of risk based on the drivers. Among other important considerations, understanding risks is proven to be and will remain dependent on access to quality climate information. This brings us to another important field, the blending of scientific and indigenous and local knowledge through insightful and equitable processes of engagement among the critical stakeholders, such as women, indigenous communities, and youth, who are at the forefront of managing risks in their communities. Secondly, we need integrated governance structures and processes for collaboration and cooperation at all levels and across all sectors. Governance arrangements need to suit the multifaceted nature of the problems being addressed across local, national, and regional levels. Importantly, the study points out that integration is more than a demonstration of what specific activities and results are mutually reinforcing across frameworks and agendas, such as the Sendai Framework and the Paris Agreement. Integration is also about the quality and extent of partnership between agendas and stakeholders and how this influences decision-making. In addition, integration is to be reflected in all aspects of programming, not only components of specific projects. 3, it's clear that we need flexible emergency funding. In a world of complex, uncertain, and cascading challenges, supporting flexibility in emergency preparedness planning will remain highly relevant. 4th, we need sustained, context-appropriate, and innovative approaches to capacity building. For efforts that reduce both climate and disaster risks while striving towards sustainable development pathways, people and institutions need more than one-off technical training sessions. A socially inclusive enabling environment for integrated approaches requires sustained administrative, technical, and financial capacity based on principles of coherence across agendas. This calls for strong and innovative communication. And finally, among the deployed structural and non-structural measures, we need nature-based solutions. They provide a critically important field for investment in the form of conservation, restoration, and the sustainable management of nature, with indigenous people and local communities as stewards at the center of how this is to be achieved. MBS provides multiple benefits for people, economies, and ecosystems, and contributes to strong disaster risk management and climate resilience outcomes. halting biodiversity loss, restoring the oceans, scaling up NBS across landscapes, and related efforts will be critical for success in achieving the Paris Agreement and the Sendai Framework. In essence, this is nothing short of being about stabilizing a destabilizing planetary system. So, wrapping up, drawing my remarks to an end, as we say in the study, the interconnected and deeply significant challenges that we face posed by climate change, by biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, by public health crises, economic, political, and security instability, social inequality, and so on, that all too often manifest in the form of disasters, should guide us in forming and acting on a bold vision for enduring and transformative solutions. The need for integrated solutions befitting the integrated nature of the challenges is key, and disasters can provide the much needed insight and impetus to do just this. A high-level outcome of the study that ties in with broader shifts in thinking around the need for interconnected solutions is that integration is already apparent, and through various initiatives and programs, there's growing momentum to do more. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from the panelists. Back to you, Irini.
Thank you very much, Paul, for setting the scene so well. I think that this idea of interconnected challenges and interconnected solutions is very important. Moving on to the next section, the panel contributions and then the open discussion. Next slide, please, Amel. I wanted to introduce the 5 panelists and the moderator. So I'll start with the moderator. Argo Singharoy is going to moderate this panel. Argo is a principal climate change specialist at ADB, where he is involved in the implementation of ADB's climate priorities and targets by supporting client governments in strengthening climate adaptation related policies, plans, and investments, and accessing climate finance. So Argo will moderate our discussion, our panel discussion here. And in terms of panelists, we have Claire Bernard, who is the Deputy Director General at the Planning Institute of Jamaica, with responsibility for sustainable development and social planning cluster. Ms. Bernard is a development specialist, and as part of her current portfolio, she oversees a number of climate change projects and is the PPCR focal point for Jamaica. We also have Felipe Montoya Pino, who is an urban specialist at the World Bank, where he leads a portfolio of urban infrastructure investments in Central America and Haiti. And he will share his experiences at TTL for a CIF-supported Haiti project. We also have Peter Bentley, who is the head of the Adaptation and Resilience team at the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. He previously led on disaster risk financing and insurance for the FCDO and helped set up the Center for Disaster Protection. And we are thrilled to have a donor voice in this panel as well. We also have Pisette Long, who is a senior project officer at ADB. He is primarily responsible for managing several projects in the agriculture, water management, and rural development sector in Cambodia since he joined ADB, and he's also previously worked in Laos, Myanmar, and the Philippines. And last but not least, we have Rita Idehai. She's the CEO of EcoBarter. Rita is one of the 20 winners of the 2023 Africa Youth Adaptation Challenge, which is an initiative, a collaboration between the CIF and the GCA. So we're thrilled to have her join the panel and share her experiences as a female entrepreneur working in the DRM and climate resilience field in Nigeria. So that is it for me. I'll pass it on to Argo. We can take down the slides, and Argo, on to you to take us into the next session.
Thank you so much, Irini, and a very good evening, everybody from Asia. First of all, thanks to CIF colleagues for organizing this very important webinar, and congratulations specifically to Paul and Irini for for leading this very important publication, and a very timely one, I would say. And I think the message from Paul was very clear that there are several sets of drivers leading to increasing disaster risk, and we really need to have integrated solutions to deal with those drivers, and those solutions that brings the DRM community and the climate adaptation community closer. So I'm very happy to have with me 5 colleagues as a part of the panel. We have roughly about 35 minutes for this panel discussion. So the way I want to structure it is we'll have each question for one of the panelists, and then I'll open it up for some questions from the audience. It's great to see more than 80 participants over here. So feel free to either type in your questions in the chat box or keep it ready. So when we have the first round of discussions, you can come in and ask your questions or even share your insights and experiences. And then if we have time, we'll go for another round of questions for the panelists. So if that's okay with everybody, maybe I'm going to start with Piset from Cambodia. I know it's quite late in Cambodia, so thanks for joining, Piset, so late. I think the message from Paul was very clear that if we want a good disaster risk management investment or solution, the first step is to understand risk. And you have been leading this project on drought and flood risk management. And of course, in that project, understanding risk was an important element of the project. So if you can just explain to us a little bit about your experiences, but how did you go about raising awareness about understanding of risk, and if there are some lessons that you have learned. Over to you, Piset.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good evening from Cambodia. I'm very happy to join this session and to share my experience in implementing this flood and drought management and risk reduction project. This project has 3 components. We have the first one is about this the enhanced regional data information and knowledge-based management of flood. We do climate resilient design guideline. We install hydromet station. We establish a national flood forecasting center, and also we share the project produced the flood and drought forecasting and transmitted this data to the National Committee for Disaster Management and the Mekong River Commission. The second component is about the upgrade civil work, upgrade the water management infrastructure. And the third one that I want to talk about is the enhanced capacity community-based disaster risk management. This we have provide training to the capacity based community-based disaster risk management, which we call CBDRM, to 50 community of that have the 750 members, including 52% of women. Then we provide these established village disaster management groups, and this group prepare the 50 village safer plan by incorporating the disaster risk reduction measure and also gender into this plan. The final activity is to rehabilitate the 5 community pond and 1 channel. This means put all these village safer plans into practice. So this is the key activity of this component. And how we do it is we go to do the assessment on these hazards, vulnerability and capacity assessment. Then we collect the baseline information from the community and in the target area, assist the community to identify risk reduction measure, both structure and non-structure, and the priority this measure by community. For the more this hazard vulnerability and capacity assessment include preparation of village map, social map, hazard map, disaster map, and record social economic activity and stakeholder. Then the second activity is we do the this training assessment, and then we develop the CBDRM guideline. We develop this training manual and recruit the trainer, and then we train the community on the CBDRM, and then we prepare this village sector plan. Then we develop the practical risk reduction measure for the flood and community. And finally is we establish the coordination committee. This what we have done during in the projects. And what is the important thing, the critical thing, as Paul mentioned, is about the understanding of the risk. So in this, the area that we were working was in Posat province, not the part of the Cambodia. We try to understand what is the disaster risk management problem in the area. Then we found that most 90% of the farmer they experience drought rather than flood. So we provide the solution to them by giving them the capacity to adopt and adjust when they have these disaster problem. So I think I very agree with the finding of Paul that strong and innovative capacity of this to adopt with this changing situation is very, very critical. Yeah, I like to stop over here because of the time. So I am happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Piset, for sharing the experiences of. I think it's very interesting to understand that you're looking at a project which has both upstream component of trying to understand risk, followed by downstream component of actually supporting investments, which I think is a great model promoted by CIF in general, but also how you talked about how you have supported about understanding risk, improving capacity, and also some of the governance or the coordination mechanisms at village level, which was some highlighted by Paul in his presentation. Thanks for that. I am going to change a bit of script to ensure there's a gender balance. I'm going to go to Claire now. Claire, thanks for joining. We would like to hear from you, from Jamaica's experience. What would you consider as an effective disaster risk management solution or investments to really build resilience of society and community? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'd just like to say that we've had a very long relationship with the CIF. In fact, 14 years now. Importantly, though, the whole question of disaster risk management and climate change adaptation were always central to our planning. And so in our National Development Plan, we had one of our national strategic outcomes being disaster risk reduction and adaptation to climate change. So when we got into a relationship with the CIF in 2010, we were able to use that as the basis for the development of our PPCR. Apart from that, we were also informed in the work we were doing by not just the vision, the National Development Plan, but our second national communication to the UNFCCC. We were also signatories to the HIOGO framework of action, and we've had some climate change projections done, and we had consultations with a number of community members. And so the program was designed around improving the quality of climate information, mainstreaming climate change, institutionalizing mechanism for financing community-level adaptation, because we know that if that is not done, then the disaster impacts can be greater, because most of our beneficiaries are very dependent on natural resources, the farmers, the fishers, etc. Now, to tell you a little bit about some of the actual investments that we have done, I can start by looking at climate data, and that's really very important. I think both Paul and Pister spoke about the importance of understanding risk. And so we have worked with the climate studies group at the University of the West Indies to downscale global climate models so that we could have more precise information for planning nationally. And we have produced 3 versions of the state of the Jamaican climate, which has been used in every element of not just the PPCR, but all disaster management and climate change adaptation programs that we've done. We've been able to use that information to help to establish early warning systems. One very famous one is for the Bugwalk Gorge, where we usually lose people and millions of dollars most hurricane seasons. And we now have an early warning system in place thanks to the PPCR that alerts not just the police, but the Office of Disaster Management and all the critical agencies working in that area to know when to close the floodgates so that people do not enter the gorge. We've also used the information to help to develop early warning messaging for 5 vulnerable groups, including women and children, persons with disabilities, etc. Our work has also transcended to the broader planning phase. So we've done vulnerability assessments of the critical climate sensitive sectors. And I think perhaps one of the most important things which links back to what Paul said is the diversification and strengthening of sustainable livelihoods. Because again, as I said before, the heavy dependence on natural resources, especially in agriculture and fisheries. And one of the things that I think we can share is that in 2017, we had some unseasonal flood rains in Jamaica in one of the most badly degraded watersheds. Like everywhere else in Jamaica, that area was impacted. And in fact, the concentration of rainfall was heaviest there. But when we did our damage and loss assessment, which was the methodology of assessment we were doing at the time, we were advised that because of the kinds of investment in reforestation, the soil management, nature-based soil management applications that had been introduced, the climate smart farming, etc., the people fared much better than they had fared before. So we've used this work in erosion control, we've used it in planning, we've developed manuals, expanded the hydromet network by over 70 automatic weather stations. We've put in river gauging equipment so that we're now able to identify remotely in real time where rivers are likely to flood and therefore alert communities. I'm sorry, so I'll stop there with just a few of the interventions, and we can pick that up the rest later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. I think you highlighted some very important points. First of all, the importance of having a national disaster risk management plan or a climate adaptation plan, which can be an anchor for designing downstream investments. You talked a lot about the climate downscaling work, but also importantly, how you partnered with university. And I think that's absolutely critical to partner with local institutions because that's kind of knowledge stays forever. And of course, then you talked about how you use risk information, not only for early warning systems, but also to inform decision-making around livelihoods and diversification of livelihoods, which is critical. Let me now move to Felipe. Thanks for joining. And based on your experience, Felipe, in terms of the urban areas, of course, we often know urban areas are kind of hotspots of climate and disaster risk, primarily because of increasing hazards, but also because of increasing exposure and vulnerability. So disaster risk management can play an important role in strengthening resilience of urban systems, but also making sure urban areas are growing towards a resilient direction. So if you can share experiences from Haiti, what worked and what would you consider as most critical in a DRM interventions for urban areas? Thank you.
Of course, and thank you very much for this kind invitation. And of course, I'm very happy to be here. Well, as you've mentioned, the world is rapidly urbanizing. And in the case of Haiti, fast and unregulated urbanization has resulted in overcrowded cities with poor livability and high exposure to disasters. Today, Haiti remains one of the most exposed countries in the world to natural hazards, and these risks will increase due to climate change. Just to give you some context and a sense of the magnitude of the problem, over 93% of the territory and more than 96% of a population are exposed to at least two types of hazards, such as floods, earthquakes, and landslides. And also, there are several statistics that show that Haiti was the third most affected country by climate events between 2000 and 2019, which of course means the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives, millions of people affected, and critical assets destroyed. As we already know, these events tend to affect disproportionately the poor, who often, and marginal populations as well, who often settle in flood zones or coastal areas and live in vulnerable self-built dwellings. And all of these are exactly the reasons why it is important to embed disaster risk reduction or DRM measures into investment planning, particularly at the city level. In our case, through the Municipal Development and Urban Resilience Project, MDUR, we have aimed to do this mainly through two strategies. So first, identifying the critical areas in the city of Cap Haitian that should be prioritized to mitigate flood risk through both structural and non-structural interventions. And second, also investing in basic urban infrastructure, both in the city in Cap Haitian and in secondary cities of the Cap Haitian metropolitan area, to first improve livability and also to better adapt to climate change. Of course, these interventions alone are not sufficient, which is why the project is also focusing on developing information and collecting data, something that Claire just mentioned as highly important, that will allow the government to plan for future interventions for flood risk management and to better plan their territories through the development of, for example, local and communal development plans. The project is, of course, very far from solving Haiti's vulnerability to disasters and climate risks, but I think that there are important results that are worth highlighting. For example, working very closely with the Ministry of Transport and Public Works and also with the Ministry of Interior, more than 10,000 people have already been directly benefited by flood risk investments in the city of Cap Haitian alone, with more than 30 hectares of urban areas with reduced flood risk, a risk that heavily challenges the city, and more than 3 kilometers of urban ravines that have been either dredged or stabilized. We are also in the process of developing Cap Haitian's flood risk management plan, which will inform and support future investments that are comprehensive. And with comprehensive, I mean basically not displacing one problem from one side to the other, and also make sure that they articulate with other projects, both from the World Bank and from other development partners. And also projects, and this is very important, that consider low maintenance cost and also solutions like that are nature-based. Moreover, through the project, we have supported the rehabilitation of more than 4 kilometers of urban roads and more than 20,000 square meters of public spaces in secondary cities, which have been improved with things like appropriate drainage and other adaptation measures, and of course, using climate resilient materials. To finish, and I think that this responds directly to the latter part of your question, one of the key considerations that cities must focus on and prioritize is basically on building local capacities so that cities can focus, for example, on the maintenance of investment beyond the duration of the project, which is an area that is oftentimes neglected in Haiti and on the global south overall, and which is extremely important to avoid the repetition of risks in the future. I'll stop here, and of course, happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for sharing very concrete, example, but also the impacts or results that the project has produced. And I did take note of a couple of things which talked about the importance of working with different ministries. I think that becomes very critical, I would assume. So when you're trying to lead some sort of a system-wide resilience building efforts, you talked about building local capacity, but also the importance of collecting data, because that can form a very important basis to inform and learn and hopefully change our course and rectify and adjust as we move on. So thanks for sharing those. Thank you. I'll move next to Rita. Thank you so much for joining. I think my question to you is, as a young social entrepreneur working on issues around circular economy, for example, can you share how you integrated or embedded concepts of resilience or climate resilience and flood risk management when you communicated your business story when you were initially starting up? Thank you.
Yes, so thank you so much, and happy to be here. So EcoBatter was founded primarily as a response to the poor waste management, that is prominent in Nigeria. So for context, right, 7 out of 10 Nigerian households do not have access to any formal waste management infrastructure, and therefore engage the services of informal waste collectors. And when these informal waste collectors pick up the waste from the homes, they mostly dump them on waterways, because they do not have access to government legal formal waste landfill, right? And this worsens our vulnerability to climate risk, such as flooding. So again, in Nigeria, despite the fact that only 20% of our states are coastal, when it rains or annually, about 80 to 90% of our states experience some sort of flooding, and this is directly related to the poor drainage and clogged drainages that we have. So when we launched EcoBatter to address this problem, right, as a platform that is tokenizing waste and enabling people use their waste as a currency, it was important for us first and to communicate to them as it is, like, so the waste that the way you're currently managing your waste makes us way more vulnerable to flooding. And sadly, or maybe not, when it rains in our cities, you would literally see the waste pushed to the street. So it was very, very easy for us to tell people that the way you are acting, the way you are consuming and disposing and trashing your waste is making us vulnerable to flooding. It is what is costing us properties and lives, right? So that's like the first way we communicate to them. But also it's very, very, it's more convincing also when we then tell them that there is an alternative to how you currently manage your waste, and the fact that there is value in what you typically even trash as waste. So 35 to 40% of the waste materials that you find on our streets are recyclables, because they're mostly like plastics, paper, carton, and metal waste. So when we also then tell them about the inherent economic value in the waste materials, right, it also gets the message to them and helps them recycle or manage their waste properly. So those 2 ways, telling them about the flood problem, telling them about how the waste management practice worsens our vulnerability, and also the value in the waste, and helping them get the value by exchanging the waste that they have for cash, has really helped us in communicating what we do at EcoBatter.
Thank you so much, Rita, for sharing experience. I think in a very simple manner, how you were able to convince the normal citizens, because at the end of the day, much of the resilience practice is about behavioral change and how every individual, every household acts. So that's great to learn about that. If I can now turn to Peter. Peter, thanks for joining. I would like to hear from you. Of course, we know UK is one of the frontline development partners, supporting, initiatives around resilience, disaster risk management, climate adaptation, disaster risk financing, etc. So from your perspective, we know that these initiatives need to be scaled up, but also scaled up to lead to transformational impacts. So do you see any particular, importance of a programmatic model that CIF has been approaching in terms of ensuring the scaling up of resilience investments actually happens and leads to transformational change? So any experiences from your side or insights you want to share? Thank you.
Thanks so much, and thank you for having me. So first of all, we're delighted with the work that the CIF has been doing, and it's really good to see this paper that's come out recently. I think where the CIF comes in, that kind of programmatic approach, is kind of bringing together all the different stakeholders as they sort of are designing these kind of implementation plans. And I think that's something that is often missing in kind of other approaches. And we're seeing a really kind of siloed approach to disaster risk management. And I think, so thinking back to my 5-6 years ago working on disaster risk financing, kind of it seemed like this obvious utopia that we're all going to do ex-ante financing. Well, of course you need to have planning. Of course you need to have kind of, early warning systems, and hearing kind of my fellow panelists it seems like almost a bit of a no-brainer that we would do more of this. But it's not taken off as it should have done. You know, it's not being kind of integrated. The climate finance space is often still separate from the disasters. We're still kind of wedded to the humanitarian space, and there's a myriad of reasons for that around kind of politics and how funding works and things. But it's not, in general, it's not an effective way to work. There will always be a place for humanitarian financing, but things like disaster risk insurance and things which I've sort of been working on in the past. And now the UK is really pushing forwards on CRUISE, the Crisis Risk Early Warning System, and linked to the UNSG's call for early action for all and things. What we really need to see is that kind of joining up of all the systems. So, you know, you have these early warning systems which are plugged through to warning people, but also that people can do something with those warnings. You know, we've got lots of examples of where systems we have good coverage, but actually, you know, if you're a poor farmer in country X, like it's all well and good if you'll be warned, but if you can't do anything with that warning, you're not empowered, and the systems and structures around you do not support you, then it falls. That early warning doesn't help you in any way. So I think that where the SIF come in and bringing all the stakeholders together, and I think that country ownership piece, which combined and with the kind of local ownership, and I think the forests work under the SIF has been really good at bringing in Indigenous people and local actors. I think that kind of when you take the programmatic approach and you look at kind of who can be involved and how, it's taking that local knowledge and local ownership and kind of what do they really need. You know, Claire, your example in Jamaica, you know, the kind of people, why, you know, people using the gorge, people, you know, if you don't give them an alternative, you know, if they can't find another way of kind of living their lives, there's no point, you know, they can't block people out from certain areas and things. I think that's where the SIF has really shown its kind of its strengths. I think nature-based solutions, that it kind of takes that approach to sort of having that kind of principled approach to kind of actually, you know, having that sustainable development approach is really, really positive. And generally, I think that kind of where we need to see some more, I think, is that kind of political momentum. I think the Early Warning for All initiative is a prime example of where, like, at the very top level, they've made this brilliant political statement, but actually kind of how does it work coming in behind that? And I think kind of, and actually coming through and delivering against those kind of political promises for donors, particularly, that's a really important thing that we're pushing for at COP28, but also have before now. And yeah, and I think, and also utilizing I think bringing the MDBs together. So is that also really helpful? So I think historically, and where there's MDBs on the line, it's not always been the case that MDBs have spoken to one another, and there's quite a few examples. I think we can probably all Google to find MDBs working in the same sort of areas and places, and donors are probably accountable for this too, where it's not working cohesively. You know, it's almost working in competition with each other, and it's not that we're trying to beat each other, it's just that that's kind of, it's just not well thought through. And, you know, for developing countries, or for all countries, having multiple actors, having to have different meetings, different understandings and different approaches is not only ineffective, it's the opposite. You know, you can lead to maladaptation because you've got multiple different, you know, different partners and things doing kind of countering things. Anyway, I think that's probably it from my side, but I look forward to the Q&A and very welcome to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Peter, for highlighting the importance of bringing different stakeholders together, which I think also Lewis talked about in his welcome remarks. And really that how if you bring stakeholders together, it helps up in breaking the silos in programming, in financing, but also helps you in joining systems. And great to know that that you guys recognize the importance of the SIF bringing the MDBs together, because for us, it's a very important platform. And we hope that donors can continue financing the platform, because it does allow MDBs to come together and use a collective strength to influence in investments. So with that, I'm going to open up for questions. The colleagues who have joined online, please feel free to raise your hands or write your questions or suggestions in the chat box. We have roughly 5 minutes to take a couple of questions. Anybody wants to break the ice? Yes, I have someone hand. Desalple. Can't pronounce it. You want to go ahead?
Hello, this is Desalegn from Ethiopia.
Thanks for joining.
First of all, I'd like to thank all panelists and the facilitator for the presentation and the participation. I have just a few questions. Currently, I'm serving the Climate Investment Funds as an observer representing indigenous peoples of Africa. So my questions directly focus on the issues related to the engagement of indigenous peoples and the initiatives, and also the projects presented by the panelists. So I was wondering to hear the level of engagement of indigenous peoples and the disaster risk management and the related initiatives, as I have not here in the list of the components of the projects that is presented by I think all of the panelists. So how have the concerns and the priorities of indigenous peoples being addressed by the initiatives? This is one question, because it has to be visible, and the knowledge system of the indigenous peoples is instrumental to accelerate the nature-based response mechanisms to reduce risks and improve results and impacts to build a resilience. So at the national level, even that for the national the disaster risk management plan, without inclusion of the indigenous people's perspectives and their knowledge, it is unlikely to effectively achieve the objectives with regard to the national or local disaster risk management programs or projects. So these are the key issues. Another point I would like to hear emphasize is how whether I'm wondering whether the free, prior, and informed consent of the indigenous people has been addressed at the very beginning of the project inception or the design level. So these are not well addressed and articulated, and their presentations, either because of the time or because of the nature of their projects. Because as the World Bank, CIF is a part of the World Bank system, and the World Bank recognizes the contribution and engagement of indigenous peoples, as far as my knowledge is concerned. So just I would appreciate if they panelists reflect on this issue. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a very important question. Maybe I'll take one more question before I open it up. So Bob, do you want to come in?
Yes. So good evening from Kampala. Thanks very much, Aga, for the excellent moderation, and thanks to the panelists for the useful insights that they've provided into this discussion. I have maybe about 3 issues, and any of the panelists can feel free to jump on any of them. The first one is we've heard either from the opening speakers and also the panelists themselves making reference to where, for example, cases are very where vulnerability and exposure is high in cases where the different presentations are coming from, capacity is low. So I would appreciate maybe from their real experience how this is being addressed in terms of the specific capacity interventions that are happening across the divide to address DRR and climate change. The second part is on maybe their real, what might integration mean in practice, irrespective of where we're working from. I think a lot has been talked about in terms of integration between DRR and climate change. So maybe it would be useful to give a bit of more insights about what that means in practice. The last point where I need a bit of thoughts, or maybe it could have gone to Paul, the previous presenters of the report. A lot has been said about the Paris Agreement, the Sendai framework, but I think Not so much has been talked about in terms of the SREX report, which we all know has a direct link with disaster risk. This is the report that's developed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So any useful thoughts in whether this is something that can be useful in referencing in relation to the bigger discussion that we are talking about in this regard? Thank you very much. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you so much. So we do have a couple of very interesting questions. So maybe I'll start with the question on indigenous people, how we have involved them and how we have make sure their concerns are heard and addressed. Any of the panelists would like to take that question? Or even Paul or Irene from your study, if you have looked at this issue and if there are any findings from that.
Well, I'm happy to hop in.
Sure.
I think perhaps my answer might also touch on something that Bob just raised about what integration looks like. I think that indigenous, I think this is the starting point. We're always in a tension between, well, we've got this plan and then we have this engagement process, and how does that look? You know, how do we get this implemented locally versus like what's needed locally, and then how does that influence a plan? And so again, like how this overall process is really important. And so clearly from my experience, my perspective, I'd say that a starting point is that engagement with local voices that are influencing the decision-making process, because we've seen time and time again where terrific solutions have fallen short of those dreams because they just haven't worked in practice over a sustained time. So we can all probably point to various places where that's been an experience. But I think that perhaps embedding all of these issues together, risk assessment, but not, you know, I think when we say risk assessment, it seems like a very technical and scientific something or other. It's like we've done this risk assessment process and it's told us that this is what needs to happen. And then why doesn't everybody just jump on board and do that? Because we've already figured it out. Maybe that's part of the SREX report too. And so how do you actually engage in that process? So I think that around risk assessment there's a very big piece of the solution there, which is who's involved in that risk assessment process. How do you what are your perspectives? What's your experience? And it's not just a risk assessment, but it's tied to action. So it's got meaning. So it's not yet another vulnerability and capacity assessment. It's like, we want to hear from you, and then that information gets plugged into some machinery in some office someplace, and we have no clue what the outcome of that is. So we have some sort of shared dialogue. So I think finding ways to blend different stakeholders in an ongoing sort of an iterative process of understanding risk, adapting, and this is where these voices can be heard and must be heard, and we stand a better chance of developing something of a sustainable pathway, even though that pathway is clearly not going to be a straight one, but we're on that journey together. So hopefully that's something of an initial reflection that maybe other panelists have got some specific ideas based on their experiences. But back to you.
Thanks, Paul. I think you reminded us a very important point. Risk assessment being really a process, and you need to engage the different stakeholders, but that engagement is not a one-off, it's a process to continuously engage them and learn from it and revisit the issues. On a second question on, of course, we heard about capacity. Sorry, Claire, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. So I want to try to answer Desaline's question, perhaps not directly talking about indigenous people because of the way our own society is organized and how the groupings are done. But our program, we believe, from the very outset was very consultative, and we attempted to involve as many persons as possible in terms of almost co-designing the SPCR. And as I said before, we were building on a previously highly consultative process. So we had what was called a technical working group on hazard risk reduction and climate change adaptation. And those people drew from civil society, the private sector, state agencies, etc., etc. But part of delivering the program, apart from going into the communities, our communications program and our public education and behavior change modification program was highly centered on the use of folk knowledge and folk forms. So we had a program called the Voices for Climate Change program. We had a mascot called Barry the Barometer. And essentially what we were doing was to use the local vernacular, to use the local art forms, to use our musicians, the local artists, and to bring them together with the university to help to translate the scientific knowledge into or to complement the local knowledge and to deliver these interactions at the community level. So we went into communities where there were Maroons, for example, and they worked with us, but we didn't have a section in our program called targeting the indigenous and so on. So I don't know if that helps Desayin to understand that you can bring all the partners together, all the players together without necessarily labeling them. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. That's a very important point of bringing in really local vernacular, knowledge, art form. I think they're a very powerful tool. Does anybody wants to take the question on capacity very briefly? Any of the other panelists on how you dealt with improving capacity, specifically in countries where capacity is a big issue?
Yeah, maybe.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, no, maybe a very short comment on this. I think that in the case of Haiti, which is a context also not only of a low capacity, but also of fragility, capacity needs to be built slowly and steady. One of the issues that we've tried to address through the project is you need to engage every stakeholder, not only the community, but also the central level government and local government, so that you can work together. And at some points, even if it's desirable, local governments may not have the capacity to implement capital investments. What we are doing in Haiti, for example, is that we are starting with a methodology or a tool, which is called MDOD, which is a Maître d'Ouvrage Délégué, in which basically municipalities support the prioritization of investments, but for the preparation and planning of investment themselves, we hire expert firms that basically help with the implementation of this. The idea is, though, that as these MDODs work in the planning and implementation of investments, they slowly basically transmit and install capacity so that in the future municipalities are able to plan and implement this investment themselves. And so this is a slow and progressive process that I think has proven quite successful in Haiti, not only for the implementation of simple investments like urban infrastructure, but also for disaster risk management and preparedness.
Great, thanks. Pisset, from your side, very briefly.
Yes, regarding the low capacity, according to our project experience is to, when we train this farmer or villager, we need to engage them to do it by themselves. For example, when after training, we ask them to prepare this village safer plan by themselves. We just only guide them to do it. Then after that, we need to put this plan into practice. That's why we try to allocate some of our projects fund to respond to their plan, such as we dig a pond and how to use the pond during the dry season, or we buy some jar put next to the house, how to respond to the flood. And that is a very key component. In addition to that, we need to work closely with the relevant government official that also build them the capacity, because when like now our project already complete, so no more activity. The only them that can continue to implement this the plan. That's so from time to time I'm sure that their capacity can respond to this emergency issue. Thank you.
Thank you. So building institutional capacity. Rita, very, very briefly, I've done a terrible job of time management. Sorry.
Okay, so two-way for us. Capacity up from the side of the CIF, they've improved the capacity of young African entrepreneurs, which I'm a beneficiary of. So there is the Youth Adapt program where, you know, there are mentorship, training courses and all of that. Then from myself as an entrepreneur, so we also work with informal waste collectors, right? And even internally displaced women, whom we then train on how to take waste materials and transform them into new products, with the hopes that these waste materials, you know, are taken off away from our environment, and then they just go on to be better, say, climate innovators themselves, you know. Just so that's what I wanted to put out there.
Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to thank all the panelists for sharing their experiences. I did see there are quite a bit of commonalities that came out around issues around capacity, around coordination, around partnerships, data collection, bringing in different stakeholders, the political momentum and the importance of it. And I think these commonalities are very critical if you want to approach this integrated solutions as Paul was suggesting in his original presentation. So thank you so much, everybody. With that, I'll hand it back to Irini. And once again, sorry from my side for doing a terrible time management job. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you, Argo, for an excellent moderation. The way you synthesize everything, I think is great, and you made my job much easier. I'll quickly, I know we're running out of time, or we have run out of time. We started 5 minutes late, so hopefully we're asking for 5-7 more minutes of your time. Moving on to the last section, we will first hear from Joaquin Toro. Who is he's part of the founders of Understanding Risk Community and Forums. He has more than 20 years of disaster risk management experience and is the regional coordinator of DRM in Latin America and the Caribbean at the World Bank. And then we'll hear from Manuel Quadio, who is the resilience programs lead for CIF, to close us up with some forward-looking remarks. So Joaquin, passing the floor on to you to let us know a bit more about the Understanding Risk Community of Practice and Initiative. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. It's really nice to see this community and listening to the results and impact that you have been having during these years. I think one aspect that I would like to touch is some remarks that Luis did at the beginning, which is the acceleration in climate action. And I think that and bringing the actions to scale is also an important aspect, and that relates very much with what we do in the community of practice of understanding risk. Understanding risk is a global platform. It's a community of over 20,000 members who are from private sector, government officials, from national, subnational, from the ministers of finance, from the ministers of infrastructure, technology. We have partners that are coming from the private sector, not very traditional, like the high-tech companies like Google, Microsoft, Twitter, TikTok, a whole range of actors. We think that we are like a community of communities, because what Understanding Risk tries to do is to bring all these different communities and have a common share of understanding of the challenge. And what you did a little bit here, to share the best experiences. And we started this in 2010. in Washington, D.C. And then we moved every 2 years to different locations. We have done in South Africa, in Cape Town in 2012. In 2014, we had the event in London. 2016, we were supposed to have it in Istanbul, but there were some bombing 2-3 months before the event, and we had to move everything to Venice, and we managed to have a fantastic event. After Venice in 2018, we had the event in Mexico City. And then, of course, 2020, we were supposed to have this in Singapore, but pandemic hit all of us, and we had this first virtual event. And then in 2022, we had, again, back face-to-face and hybrid in Florianopolis in Brazil. And next year, we will have the event in Himeji, very nearby Kobe in Japan, in June, the week of 17 of June in Japan. We are very, very happy that CIF is becoming a partner of this activity, part of understanding risk, because I think the activities that you guys have done contribute quite a lot to the community. I hope all of you can participate. We just finished the expressions of interest for the technical sessions. It's a whole week of events. There's a lot of places to create these networks, share the experiences and spark new partnerships. We believe that people have better connections while they are smiling. So this is an event that is very outside of the common forum and conference that you participated in the UN or other more formal conference that we do at the bank. We are very laid back because at the end of the day, what we want to foster is this connections, this networking and creation of these new partnerships to really bring and accelerate climate action and bring to scale the good practices and the innovations that you are doing in your countries, in your activities. So I really hope that you can participate on this event. I will leave the website of the event in the chat, and we will be announcing very soon the registration for the event, I think in December or early January. Thank you again, and it was a really great to hear all your stories and your experiences.
Thank you so much, Joaquin, for this great presentation and kind of update on understanding risk. I think that's always what we try to do with these type of events, to kind of foster additional partnerships and collaborations and create these knowledge exchanges. So I think I'll pass the floor on to Manu, but from my side, I think it would be great for CIF to join Understanding Risk community. We have a lot to share and to learn, and together we can address, we have to partner and collaborate to address these challenges that we face. So Manu, on to you for closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erini, and thank you for being the master of ceremony of today. And I really thank you because you have been one of the mastermind behind the preparation of this webinar. Distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Climate Investment Fund and our interim CEO, Mr. Luis Tineo, we kindly accept you to open this first webinar of the CIF Resilience Knowledge Series. I would like to sincerely thank you, one of you, for your active participation and significant contribution to this webinar. I would also like to thank our distinguished presenters, moderators, and panelists of today. My colleague Matthew will lead our CIF Technical Assistance Facility. Paul, the lead author of the CIF GRM report. Ago, our insightful moderator from ADB. Claire, our experienced Jamaica PPCR focal points. Peter for providing this excellent donor perspective, and Peter Long and Felipe, our DRM expert from ADB and the World Bank. And obviously Rita, our inspired winner of the Africa Youth Adaptation Solution Challenge initiative, a fruit of our CIF partnership with the Global Center for Adaptation. I'm personally very pleased with the outcome of this webinar, the first of its kind for the CIF Resilience team, which provided us with an invaluable opportunity to share the best practices and lessons learned from CIF 15 years experience implementing disaster risk management through investment in climate resilience action. I appreciate it very much your active exchange of ideas and views on how we could effectively address and fill the gap in disaster reduction and responses. The common concern of addressing disaster problem holistically and on mainstreaming disaster risk management into development strategies and undertakings were pointed. In addition, the necessity of hazard mapping and vulnerability assessment and the adoption of disaster risk management processes at all levels as critical undertaking to reduce risk and vulnerabilities were emphasized. I would like to kindly remind you that this webinar is only one of the starting points. The CIF Climate Resilience team plans to sustain this effort and provide you continuous and deep knowledge of the CIF's 15-year experience implementing the pilot program for climate resilience, our PPCR program, and its technical assistance facility, TAF. To make this effort sustainable, we would like to count on you to count on your active participation to our upcoming webinar, because really, this is what the CIF is about, what the PPCR is about. Enable learning by doing and sharing lessons at country, regional, and global level. So I just to say that as a next step, you should expect in the first quarter of 2024, another webinar, similar to this one on the topic of women as agent of change, PPCR support for advancing women's climate leadership. So please stay tuned. And again, thank you very much for your active participation to this webinar, and we'll keep you posted. But before we close, I really would like to thank some of my colleagues beyond the scene, Amel, Erin, Xianfu, who are kind of really supporting the team to prepare this webinar. And I would like to kind of invite you all to kind of put your pictures, or you open your camera so that you can take a group photo that can use for our internal communication, if that's possible. And again, thank you very much for coming to this webinar and for your valuable contributions. Thanks.
Thank you, Manu. So as Manu mentioned, before we close, we would like to take a group picture. If you can please have your camera on. Wait, let me try. Okay. Okay, I'll try to have that. So, okay, let me just try to move this. Okay, let's try to just take this one. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to make sure that everybody, I'm seeing some people are already on the process of putting camera on. Okay.
Will you smile?
Oh yeah. Yes. I say CIF. I'll take it different. I'll be taking different sessions. So one. Then I also take a screenshot. So 1, 2, 3.
CIF.
CIF. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for connecting, and we'll keep you posted on our next webinar.
Merci aux communicateurs. Merci à tous.
Thank you to everyone.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Have
everyone.
a good rest of the day.
You too.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Good day.